How many of you have ever heard of a blessing of the pets Sunday? Blessing of the pets. Well, we've been thinking about trying that here. We're going to give you about a year to get used to the idea, but it has come up. Anyway, there was a blessing of the pets Sunday at a church that a friend of mine was the minister in, and he started off telling this story. It was about a little bird and a squirrel. And he said he was sitting out in his backyard one afternoon, enjoying a little bit of sunshine, and something bewildering happened. This little squirrel was running full tilt along his back fence, and this little bird was flying after it and swooping and attacking it and chirping and doing all sorts of things, incredibly aggravated it seemed. And at one point the bird stopped chirping, and the little squirrel, he said, looked over its shoulder to see if it was still there. And of course it was still there, but in that motion the squirrel almost fell off the fence, but got back up and put his head down and sort of kept running full tilt to get away from this angry bird. Angry birds, that's good. Anyway, my friend, he said, he thought to himself, my, that bird has some nerve, because, I would assume that a squirrel, if it turned around and attacked the bird, it would get the better of the bird, but it didn't. And what would the bird do if it was squirrel turned around and attacked it? And he said, well, probably nothing. And then he mused about what was happening, and he said, the bird really had no power over it, but it was posturing over something. Maybe it was a little nut or a worm or something. And the interesting thing was, the following week, after that story, he got more emails about that particular story in a sermon than he'd ever had over any sermon that he'd preached before. And the gist of the emails was, he wouldn't like me saying this, but silly person, if you had lived in the country or grown up in the country like I have, you would have known that squirrels sort of like eggs, and this was a squirrel that probably got too close to the nest, and the mother bird or the father bird was chasing this squirrel away. And there was maternal, paternal, whatever it was, protection going on there. And I thought, what a significant image for Mother's Day, or as we call it in the church, Christian Family Sunday. And when it comes to offspring, mothers and fathers are frequently protective, and they do all sorts of things to ensure their children's well-being and their safety and all sorts of things. Well, I was reading in the last week a little bit of John's Gospel, and I'm reading John chapter 2. And it suddenly jumped out at me, because I'm thinking Mother's Day, Mother's Day, Mother's Day, what can I say? Suddenly jumped out at me that Mary is here in this account of Jesus at Cana of Galilee. We don't know an awful lot about Jesus' upbringing, and there's nothing to be heard about Joseph during Jesus' adult or ministry years. There's speculation that he had maybe passed away, but Mary, it seems, was very active with her young man. And the family home may have been in Nazareth, but here we find Mary, not only here, but a few times as part of Jesus' entourage during his ministry. And I always knew that she was there at the end, at the cross, but I hadn't picked up on the fact that she was with Jesus from time to time in his ministry as well, and was here at the beginning with this first miracle at Cana of Galilee. He already had disciples around him, and they had been invited to a wedding, and I don't know about you, but usually by the time you reach a certain age, you don't want your parents around, right? So I'm thinking, what's she doing there with Jesus? But she's there, and she's involved, it seems, in Jesus' life. And we read the story, and it's obvious that Mary knew something about Jesus, that there were some special things about Jesus, because she instructed, when they ran out of wine, she instructed the servants to do as he told them. And following his instructions, of course, they went and they drew quite a lot of water out of neighboring creek and filled these big urns. And as it turns out in the story, Jesus is a great guy to have at a party. Because the water turned into wine. And it wasn't just ordinary wine, but like if Donald were here, he would say it was the best, absolutely the best, like the very best wine that they had come across. Nothing better than this. And people were amazed. And Jesus did this. Here's what John says. Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there for a few days. Did you catch it again? I usually sort of glance over those little pieces. They're sort of the geographical references in the Gospels, or just mention of a few people that are around. As I'm reading, you pay particular attention to the theological portions, but his mother went with them down to Capernaum. Mary continued to travel with Jesus, and I've been thinking about what that means. Why she did this. And it's very clear to me that as a parent, she chose to be present. I asked a Jewish friend of mine about this and why she seemed to be there all the time. She said, "Oy vey!" She said, she did, actually. Of course, like any Jewish mother, she was there. So she's there. And as you think about it, perhaps presence is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to a child, just being present. Now, there will be times they won't want us there, but being there for them. I remember some statistics from, I think it was the 1970s, and I was quite shocked at them. The statistics were something like the average father spends, I can't remember the number, but it was something like 37 seconds a day in quality time with their child. And these stats were used to encourage better parenting and more presence, and improve we have, because a study in 2012 indicated that fathers now spend an average of 35 minutes a day with their children. And it's talking about quality time, so women, it's 60 minutes, 1 hour. And so it's not counting sort of the general running around the house sort of thing, but the quality time, 1 hour. And that same study, it noted that as time spent with children grew, then there were improved grades, improved development, improved opportunity later on in life. And it seems to me it's really interesting that Mary is present with Jesus. And nobody captures that more beautifully than John Killinger. He has a prayer that reads a bit like a creed. He said, "I believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, who was born of the promise to a virgin named Mary. I believe in the love Mary gave her Son that caused her to follow him in his ministry and stand by his cross as he died. I believe in the love of all mothers and its importance in the lives of the children they bear. It is stronger than steel, softer than down, more resilient than a sapling on a hillside. It closes wounds, melts disappointments, and enables the weakest child to stand tall." And it goes on. Beautiful piece of work by John Killinger. And I think most parents are actually capable of of this kind of presence with, and this kind of love and being there for their children. But there's one thing I want to encourage in this today for those who are young families in our midst, and it might have something to say to grandparents as well, so pay attention, everybody else. These days, one of the most important things for us to do is to pass on, as part of being there for our children, is to pass on the faith that we have. We're finding younger generations are not showing up in church so much, and it's become very, very difficult. I think now we need to pay much, much more attention to this. Children aren't encouraged in faith as they were in many places in our world today. And you know, the singular most important place that a child can be influenced in faith and encouraged just happens to be in the home. Some people would say that it's in the church, but it's really in the home where children will know and see that what they learn maybe in another place is learned out, is acted out and authenticated in the lives of those around them, those they love most, their parents. And so this morning I want to say to younger parents and grandparents, make God and make faith a part of your being there for your children. The writer in this other passage that was read for us by June, of Deuteronomy chapter 6, this passage is part of it is probably the best known passage to Jewish people. It's something they memorize. It's part of their Hebrew Bible, which is our Old Testament, and many Hebrew people that just can rattle off this thing. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, and they go on and on. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. Adonai Echad, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words which I'm commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. And they're tremendous words affirming a love for God, a love for others, but also keeping the Christian faith alive, the Word of God alive, by teaching it to your children. And so I suggest, particularly to parents with young ones, if you can buy one of those books of Bible stories and in your reading to children, include that as part of your being there and part of your reading to them. And it sort of begins to set a foundation. A little later, they'll want cartoons and things, and there are biblical sort of Christian cartoons available with wonderful themes. And then as time goes on, grace around a meal, prayers around family meal, those can be important, and discussing life events within the lens of faith. These can all be important things. One of my favorite shows on television these days is called Blue Bloods. Don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a program about the stories connect with the family. They've all been involved in law enforcement for generations. And it's so intriguing that in every episode there's a family meal or two, and they say grace and pray. And there's a strong morality, strong family, community themes that work through every single episode. And I think those things are important. And as we interact with life and things that go on in our lives, bring it through the lens of faith as well. Don't be afraid to do that. Now, I did mention church a moment ago, that the church can help in this process. Maybe not the central place, home is, but it can help. But we have a problem. And I did a little study about half a dozen years ago of a certain congregation, downtown, urban, an affluent congregation, So you can think people with cottages, people with who take great summer vacations, winter vacations, chalets, skiing. We've got all sorts of things. So I did this study, and I thought as a really good estimate of how many people the regular church attenders, or how many times the regular church attenders were in church was, and I use that term regular, 16 times a year was regular attendance. And I got thinking about that, and as you think about 16 times a year, it was mostly October, November, December was always the best month. Then you get skiing, and then you get nothing till after March break, and then it's a little bit of April, or March, and all of April, a little bit of May. About 16 Sundays. And if you take that number and sort of think about how long a child gets in Sunday school in a year, maybe they get 20 or 30 minutes on a Sunday, let's say 30. That means they get 8 hours a year of Christian teaching in the church. And I'm not telling you this to deny anybody cottage life. If you've got that option, use it for sure. And I don't want to guilt anyone into doing anything. But what I just want to point out is something to think about, that we ask the church to do so much, and yet the church maybe has the possibility of getting a child 8 hours a year for teaching. You know, they get almost that much in a day, or at least 2 days in public school. And if you multiply it, I think people do better in Belleville than in the big city. So if you think, okay, my average would be 30 times at church a year, or 40, I mean, you're still only dealing with 15 or 20 hours, so that's like 1 week of public school. And we need to improve that somehow, and you need to think about that and put it into your thinking. And so, you know, if there's an opportunity at a cottage to have a child in a Sunday school or in a vacation Bible event that's going on nearby, you know, those sorts of things are all important and things that we need to think about as parents and grandparents. But I want to add to the church, like, we as well need to be there for our young people. And we need to do things. Just like parents are there, we need to be there. And we need, as a church, to provide the best programs we possibly can, and to keep doing that. Even when numbers are perhaps weak, keep doing it. I keep remembering, if you build it, they will come. Do you know the movie? If you build it, they will come. Doesn't always happen in life, but at least we need to try to have it there. And we need to be active. We need to actually do something. I have an uncle. Not the uncle I told you about a few weeks ago, but another uncle. And he's my last uncle. He's in his 90th year. My dad died when I was quite young, and my uncle Ariel stepped in and helped out a lot when I was young. I needed it. It was very, very interesting. He would come by when we were young. The family, he'd come by and he'd babysit from time to time. And then as I got a little older, he'd take me out on a Saturday afternoon to a football game. That's soccer, the local team. And he would take me on Sunday afternoons, sometimes to my grandmother's or to visit other relatives. And sometimes we'd just go over to his house, and he had a great record collection, because records were in the vogue then, as they are now. And we'd just chat and talk and listen to music. One thing that he did just amazed me. My mother, God bless her, she decided that I really should go to school at her alma mater, which was in the next town. Didn't matter that it was a perfectly good school that I could walk to. I had to go to the next town and take 2 buses. Well, in all the discussion about that, and I guess I kicked up a bit of a fuss, Ariel, my uncle, decided that he would drive me every day. and for a couple of years drove me to school. Just amazing. So last year, I was back in the old country, and I was talking to him, and we started talking about how he had helped. And he mentioned my dad's funeral and how people were saying such kind things and concerned things about my mother and 3 young children. And they would say that they're praying for us and they're thinking about us and that sort of thing. And he said, while those things may be important, they're not going to amount to too much then unless we actually do something. And so Ariel decided that he would be present. And I think that's what we need to do as a church, as well as parents in the lives of children, as church. Be present in the lives of our young people, and not just think that we're doing it by praying for them. I know it's valuable. It brings God into the mix. But actually, do.